The Ethics by Benedict de Spinoza, translated by R.H.M. Elves. Part 2. Note. In order to remove every scruple, I have thought it worthwhile to point out some of the advantages which follow therefrom. I say some, for they will be better appreciated from what we shall set forth in the fifth part. It remains to point out the advantages of a knowledge of this doctrine as bearing on conduct, and this may be easily gathered from what has been said. The doctrine is good. 1. Inasmuch as it teaches us to act solely according to the decree of God, and to be partakers in the divine nature, and so much the more as we perform more perfect actions and more understand God. Such a doctrine not only completely tranquilizes our spirit, but also shows us where our highest happiness or blessedness is, namely solely in the knowledge of God, whereby we are led to act only as love and piety shall bid us. We may thus clearly understand how far astray from a true estimate of virtue are those who expect to be decorated by God with high rewards for their virtue and their best actions, as for having endured the direst slavery, as if virtue and the service of God were not in itself happiness and perfect freedom. 2. Inasmuch as it teaches us how we ought to conduct ourselves with respect to the gifts of fortune, or matters which are not in our power, and do not follow from our nature. For it shows us that we should await and endure fortune's smiles or frowns with an equal mind, saying that all things follow from the eternal decree of God by the same necessity, as it follows from the essence of a triangle that the three angles are equal to two right angles. 3. This doctrine raises social life, inasmuch as it teaches us to hate no man, neither to despise, to deride, to envy, or to be angry with any. Further, as it tells us that each should be content with his own, and helpful to his neighbour, not from any womanish pity, favour, or superstition, but solely by the guidance of reason, according as the time and occasion demand, as I will show in Part 3. 4. Lastly, this doctrine confers no small advantage on the commonwealth, for it teaches how citizens should be governed and led, not so as to become slaves, but so that they may freely do whatsoever things are best. I have thus fulfilled the promise made at the beginning of this note, and I thus bring the second part of my treatise to a close. I think I have therein explained the nature and properties of the human mind at sufficient length, and, considering the difficulty of the subject, with sufficient clearness. I have laid a foundation whereon may be raised many excellent conclusions of the highest utility and the most necessary to be known, as will, in what follows, be partly made plain.
Part 1. Appendix. In the foregoing I have explained the nature and properties of God. I have shown that he necessarily exists, that he is one, that he is and acts solely by the necessity of his own nature, that he is the free cause of all things, and how he is so, that all things are in God, and so depend on him, that without him they could neither exist nor be conceived. Lastly, that all things are predetermined by God, not through his free will or absolute fiat, but from the very nature of God or infinite power. I have further, where occasion afforded, taken care to remove the prejudices which might impede the comprehension of my demonstrations.
Part 2. On the nature and origin of the mind. Preface. I now pass on to explaining the results, which must necessarily follow from the essence of God, or of the eternal and infinite being. Not indeed all of them, for we proved in Part 1, Proposition 16, that an infinite number must follow in an infinite number of ways, but only those which are able to lead us, as it were, by the hand, to the knowledge of the human mind and its highest blessedness.
Part 3. On the origin and nature of the emotions. Most writers on the emotions and on human conduct seem to be treating rather of matters outside nature than of natural phenomena following nature's general laws. They appear to conceive man to be situated in nature as a kingdom within a kingdom, for they believe that he disturbs rather than follows nature's order, that he has absolute control over his actions, and that he is determined solely by himself. They attribute human infirmities and fickleness not to the power of nature in general, but to some mysterious flaw in the nature of man, which accordingly they bemoan, deride, despise, or, as usually happens, abuse. He who succeeds in hitting off the weakness of the human mind more eloquently or more acutely than his fellows is looked upon as a seer. Still there has been no lack of very excellent men, to whose toil and industry I confess myself much indebted, who have written many noteworthy things concerning the right way of life, and have given much sage advice to mankind. But no one, so far as I know, has defined the nature and strength of the emotions, and the power of the mind against them for their restraint. I shall, therefore, treat of the nature and strength of the emotions according to the same method as I employed heretofore in my investigations concerning God and the mind. I shall consider human actions and desires in exactly the same manner as though I were concerned with lines, planes, and solids.
Part 4. Of Human Bondage, or the Strength of the Emotions. Preface. Human infirmity, in moderating and checking the emotions, I name bondage. For when a man is a prey to his emotions, he is not his own master, but lies at the mercy of fortune, so much so that he is often compelled, while seeing that which is better for him, to follow that which is worse. Why this is so, and what is good or evil in the emotions, I propose to show in this part of my treatise. But before I begin, it would be well to make a few prefatory observations on perfection and imperfection, good and evil. Perfection and imperfection, then, are in reality merely modes of thinking, or notions, which we form from a comparison among one another of individuals of the same species. Hence I said above, Part 2, Definition 6, that by reality and perfection I mean the same thing. As for the terms good and bad, they indicate no positive quality in things regarded in themselves, but are merely modes of thinking, or notions which we form from the comparison of things one with another. Thus, one and the same thing can be at the same time good, bad, and indifferent. For instance, music is good for him that is melancholy, bad for him that mourns. For him that is deaf, it is neither good nor bad. Nevertheless, though this be so, the terms should still be retained, for inasmuch as we desire to form an idea of man as a type of human nature which we may hold in view, it will be useful for us to retain the terms in question, in the sense I have indicated. Lastly, by perfection in general, I shall, as I have said, mean reality. In other words, each thing's essence in so far as it exists and operates in a particular manner and without paying any regard to its duration, for no given thing can be said to be more perfect because it has passed a longer time in existence. The duration of things cannot be determined by their essence, for the essence of things involves no fixed and definite period of existence, but everything, whether it be more perfect or less perfect, will always be able to persist in existence with the same force wherewith it began to exist. Wherefore, in this respect, all things are equal.
Part 5 of the Power of the Understanding, or of Human Freedom. Preface. At length I pass to the remaining portion of my ethics, which is concerned with the way leading to freedom. I shall therefore treat therein of the power of the reason, showing how far the reason can control the emotions, and what is the nature of mental freedom or blessedness. We shall then be able to see how much more powerful the wise man is than the ignorant. It is no part of my design to point out the method and means whereby the understanding may be perfected, nor to show the skill whereby the body may be so tended as to be capable of the due performance of its functions. The latter question lies in the province of medicine, the former in the province of logic. Here therefore, I repeat, I shall treat only of the power of the mind, or of reason, and I shall mainly show the extent and nature of its dominion over the emotions, for their control and moderation. That we do not possess absolute dominion over them, I have already shown. Therefore, since the power of the mind, as I have shown above, is defined by the understanding only, we shall determine solely by the knowledge of the mind the remedies against the emotions, which I believe all have had experience of, but do not accurately observe or distinctly see, and from the same basis we shall deduce all those conclusions which have regard to the mind's blessedness.